Hello, my name is Matt Ormsby. Today we're going to make a country sourdough bread, meaning it's naturally leavened. There's no commercial yeast in it, just flour, water, and salt. This is a dough that I have been auto-lysing for about an hour and a half. Auto-lysing is just mixing the flour and water together. And a couple of things happen when you do that. A process called amylase happens where the enzymes in flour are broken down into complex sugars, making more food available for the yeast. The starches in the flour are also converted to gluten, which will make the dough more extensible, and basically doing a lot of the work for you when you go to develop the dough. Right here I got some salt, a little bit of water. This is my leaven. This leaven is 12 hours old. I mixed it up last night. So let's get ready to make some dough. So just to show you what happens when you just let the autolyse happen, the dough has already started to develop. Gluten's been formed, allowing the dough to become more extensible. So right at this point, I add my salt. I add a little bit of water to help dissolve the salt. Now I'm going to add my leaven. I use 20% leaven generally in my doughs. I find I get the best fermentation that way. This is a 400 grams worth of flour in this. So 20% of that would be 80 grams of leaven. There we go. Remove my scale and spread all this out. Dipple it into the matrix of the dough. And I like to fold the dough onto itself. Helps incorporate the salt and the leaven a little more evenly throughout the dough. When I autolyse this, I used 75% water. We're going to end up with a final dough hydration of about 82% by the time it's all said and done. I added 2% water on top of the salt just to help dissolve the salt. It's fairly well incorporated. Now we're going to begin to develop the dough. So to do that, I use this method. It's a method I learned from a man called Trevor J. Wilson. He has aided me a lot in sourdough making. And what this action does is it imitates what a diving arm mixer does. Some people like to use slap and folds. I don't particularly like to do that so much, as I find it does a little more damage to the dough that way from it sticking to the table. I like to keep everything in the bowl. It's a lot less messy. I do this for 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how fast the dough is coming together. As you can see, it's holding together pretty good. I find if you start with a lower percentage of water, it's easier to develop the dough. And then later on add the water after the dough is already developed. It's a method called double hydration. So I do this for 5 to 10 minutes. Now I'll let it rest for 10 to 15 minutes. Now I'll come back, do this again for another 1 to 2 minutes. All depends on the dough. Depends on the flours you use, the hydration. The higher hydration you start with, the longer it will take for the dough to develop. The bulk fermentation. A lot of people will go by cookbooks, and cookbooks give you more or less a time frame for when your bulk fermentation should be done. Because there's too many factors, for instance, dough temperature, the temperature in your room, activity of your yeast, the types of flour you use. There's a lot of variables that can affect the amount of time it takes your dough to complete its bulk ferment. So we're not going to go by a time frame here. We're going to go by how the dough feels, how the dough looks, how the dough smells, to gauge when the bulk fermentation is done. I've tried using timelines in the past, and they just don't work well for me. So generally my doughs do take about 5 to 6 hours. I shoot for a dough temperature of 75 to 78 degrees. Where I actually stick a thermometer actually in the dough and measure the dough temperature that way. There's a couple of tricks that I do to stabilize the temperature of the dough. If it gets too warm, 5-10 minutes before the fold, I'll put it in the fridge just to chill the outside of the dough, and then I do the fold, and then the dough will usually go down a few degrees. If it's too cold, you can turn on your oven for a minute just to get warmed up in there. Stick your dough in there 10 minutes before fold, just to warm the outside of it. And then do the fold, and then it'll warm up the dough a few degrees that way. Okay, the dough has been sitting for about 15 minutes now. As you can see, there's some good development going on. You even had a gluten bubble there form. So I do this for another 1 to 2 minutes, usually no longer than that. The more you do this, the more extensible your dough will become up to a certain point. Signs I look for when the dough has been developed is it holds together nice, doesn't want to come apart. I can tell just by the way this dough feels, it's going to be a nice dough. Feels nice and smooth. It's coming cleanly from the bowl, which is also a good thing. So right now this dough is at 77% hydration, which for people newer at the making of these kind of doughs, you may want to just stick with that. You may not want to go above 77. In fact, you may even want to start at even a lower hydration, not going above 70% until you get a good feel for the doughs. It's looking pretty good. So now I'm going to transfer this into a clean bowl. I've already placed 5% of the water in here. And now we begin the bog fermentation.